Okay, excellent. Well, I'm pleased today to be here with Jared Kaplan. He is the co-founder and CEO at Indigo Technologies. Welcome, Jared.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. So let's jump into it. It's great to have you here. Most people think of MedMal as a slow, kind of conservative, somewhat hostile to innovation type of segment of the industry. And from what I understand about Indigo, you're betting that leveraging AI, better data, and a different operating model can make life easier for both physicians and brokers, and still be able to underwrite efficiently. So maybe you could just jump in and tell us a little bit more about Indigo and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Totally. Well, I think your description is accurate, and that is the opportunity. So as entrepreneurs, we look for these spaces that are sometimes not well established, but really I've always seen in my career that the most established spaces with the biggest behemoth companies are sometimes the best playgrounds to innovate. And in insurance, I think medical malpractice is one of the last bastions of adopting new technology. It has been devoid of investment, but it is a old school space that has plenty of very capable competitors. And we're trying to attack the two big pain points we see. One is it's still very expensive. And two is it is very, very difficult to procure and administratively burdensome. And so if you can streamline the process and you can figure out those out there that deserve better prices without sacrificing coverage or claims management, there's a great opportunity to create value. And that's what we've done at Indigo. We started with the premise that you don't need an application. Every doctor has a unique identifier, a national provider ID or an NPI. And we've been able to figure out 1,500 alternative data points that are unique to a physician. And then we've trained that against a set of about 60% of the medical malpractice claims over the last 7 years to figure out the 20% of the docs that drive 60% of the claims. And we can do it in real time. So we're the easiest to do business with. We're super easy for the brokers to work with the doctor to procure a quote. And then for the 80% of docs who aren't in that bottom 20%, we can save a little more than half of them, at least 10%. And it's painless to figure out whether you're a good option for us. So we're off to a really good start here. The company's about 2 years old in market. There's still a long, long way to go. But we know we're onto something big here. And it's a lot of fun.
And so what's been the biggest thing that's kind of surprised you about medical malpractice, or what's something, you've worked at some interesting companies, you've worked in the industry, but when you tell people about what you're doing, is there one thing that surprised you that you kind of tell your friends and colleagues about?
Yeah, I mean, on paper, everything works beautifully. The technology that we've built is continuously improving, and it's already light years ahead of where the marketplace is. So our ability to turn around quotes and to save people money is unheralded. But the reality is, no matter how sexy the technology is, especially in insurance, there is still a old school mentality, a relationship component that is critical. And price is not the only thing that matters, right? Credibility, longevity, your ability and experience, all of these things are critical for the brokers and ultimately the physician groups to trust us and our brand. And so no matter how sexy the technology is, our go-to-market is very old-fashioned, and it's our ability to build relationships with the intermediaries and the end customers and prove to them that we deserve their business that's going to drive the success of us long term.
And was there another business, not necessarily in insurance, but another business that you model this on where, again, there's sort of an identifier, you could sort of underwrite people without an application, and I'm also curious about how you assembled the alternative data as well, and whether you had a model for that too.
For sure. My career, the first half of my career was as an investor, actually as an incubator of companies. I worked for a firm where we would think of an idea and then we'd spend 12, 18 months studying it. And if we liked what we saw after that, we would build the business plan and hire the team to go and execute it. I ended up founding a business called InsurTech, which was an online insurance agency for freelance businesses. Think about it like the Expedia for freelance businesses, and believed in it so much that when we hired the CEO, I went to go work for him as his number two. And that was all about cracking online distribution for small business insurance, which really hadn't existed. You had personal lines. Esurance was the big company in auto back in the day, but nothing really in small business. And I did learn a lot about how you streamline that online process and make it incredibly easy for all the constituents to procure a quote. And then after I left InsurTech, which we ultimately sold to Hub and Bold Penguin, I worked for a family in Chicago to build a company called Opportunity Financial, OpFi. And that was all about using alternative data and machine learning to figure out which non-prime borrowers actually perform like prime borrowers. So they had very poor FICO scores, but we didn't use FICO. We used all different types of alternative data points to figure out who had both the ability and the willingness to repay, even if their traditional credit score was very weak. And that was a very successful business that we ended up taking public. I would argue Indigo is the baby of both of those, right? Because it has the online distribution component to it, and certainly the underwriting using alternative data and machine learning component to it. And this company was incubated by a company called Rubicon Founders in Nashville. Rubicon is a healthcare-focused private equity firm, but they also start a lot of businesses run by a former colleague of mine, Adam Bowler, who's been unbelievably successful as an entrepreneur, now as an investor. And we, as a management team, we benefited from years of work that they had done, kicking around various variables and machine learning models to figure out what we thought was predictive. And over the last 2.5 years that I've been involved, that has continuously improved. And there are different buckets of data. The industry, the incumbents, they typically use a handful of data. They look at where you're based as a physician, your geography. They'll look at your specialty. So, an OB or a neurosurgeon is going to be a lot more risky than a family concierge medical doc. They'll look at your education. They'll look at your claims history. But if I lined up all the neurosurgeons in Topeka, Kansas, and I separated them into two segments, one that had claims and one that didn't, you would see the pricing within each of those groups, the standard deviation would be very small. There's very little differential. So we ended up taking 1,500 other data points that are heavily reliant on healthcare medical claims data, social determinants of health data, political data. And on a geo and specialty basis, we have been able to figure out what drives risk. So what drives risk for a gastro doc in Sacramento, California may be very different than what drives risk for a gastro doc in Newark, New Jersey. But we built the cohorts, we understand what drives risk, and then we segregate that risk to ensure that we avoid the docs that are most likely to get a claim and focus on the docs that are less likely and are overpaying.
Got it. And so that data can parse through docs who may have been unlucky in having claims to date and or lucky in not having claims to date.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we see clean groups. They haven't had a claim in 10 years. We don't want them, right? We think we can see behind the wall. We see a ticking time bomb. There are other groups that just had a claim. It's an ugly claim. All the carriers are running away. We know it's a flu claim, right? In both of those cases, we're able to provide what we believe is a price that more accurately depicts that group's underlying risk profile, and they can save a lot of money, and they can, do it without filling out a 15-page app with 300 questions. So it works very, very well. And there is just a tremendous amount of inefficiency in the market. That is, you see this in lots of old school markets that are dominated by a handful of players. MedMal is highly concentrated. You have less than 10 players that own 2/3 of the space. And you haven't seen any private equity or venture capital investment. So, I think part of our success here is we're not trying to recreate the wheel. Half our team came from the space. They spent 20, 25, 30 years at the incumbents. So they've seen the way that the status quo works, but they believe it can be done better. And then the other half of the team are from the fintech world, right? We've got engineers and product managers and data scientists who don't know MedMal, but they understand how to use these tools to find the arbitrage that exists. And that's been a very successful equation.
And even if you do have better tech, better underwriting, I suppose ostensibly better pricing as a result, but it is a heavily relationship-driven industry. Kind of how do you overcome that and get people on the platform?
Yeah, it's some of that is time-driven. You can't speed it up. It's you launch the business, everyone's first instinct is, oh, these guys don't know anything about the space, and they're going to blow up the business, and they're going to grow it too fast, and the claims will come, and they try to discredit you with your immaturity. It's really hard to argue against that, right? Like I can't walk into a distribution partner's office and speak about the 100 years we've had in business, right? Yeah. But what we can do is we can talk about the quality of the team, and we can talk about early results, right? And we have some of the gods of the industry on our board, and we've got some unbelievably seasoned players, some who even grew up in the industry. My chief sales officer, his dad was in the industry. Everyone remembers him from when he was in diapers, right? So there is this familiarity with some of our people that have had very successful backgrounds, which is important. And then, I think we're in a different era of insurance technology. Gone are the days where there was zero interest rates, and many of the insurance technology companies grew exponentially with reckless abandon, and they promised the ability to drive loss ratios better than the industry. We don't have that benefit of zero interest rates. And even if we did, I don't think we'd build a business that way, but we've been super prudent, right? We basically have taken the approach of we're going to grow this company rapidly, especially for the space, which doesn't grow that fast, but we're going to have tangible results early on that prove to people that we really care about the loss ratios. And thankfully, our claims frequency has been well below the industry average, even actually lower than our internal models would suggest. And it's because we've been really conservative. And I think that people gain confidence when they see that you're not just underpricing risk, right? Because it's not hard to grow in insurance, just underprice the risk right now. Right.
Sure.
And this is the longer tail line. It's not workers' comp. It's not 7-8 years, but it is 2 to 3 years where you fully know your development. We write only claims made policies today. So we know the frequency and we understand the potential for development pretty early, and the results have been stellar. And our promise of being fast on the admin side has really come to fruition, right? We'll do over 7,000 submissions this year. We have an underwriting team of 4 with a chief underwriting officer. We have 5 people in underwriting doing 7,000 plus submissions. It would take our competitors 10x that to do it in a high quality way. And then, when groups are growing and they're adding docs, there's no arduous process to have to reapply, right? We get the MPI, we add you on, right? So we like to think we're like, it's an apple.com almost experience, an amazon.com experience of how you procure and you work with us, but it's insurance at the end of the day. It's not an electronic product.
So it seems like in some ways it's sort of like a clean sheet rethink, and in other ways you still have to kind of map to certain traditions of how people do business. Does that get tricky at all, or is it sort of natural to be able to build that out, either because you've done it before with Insurion, or have there been any particular problems in balancing that?
I mean, the one thing that I've consistently seen is it's always hard, and the more success you have, the harder it gets, right? I talk to my team about, like, you're on a treadmill, and the treadmill gets faster and it gets steeper every year, right? And you start taking accounts away from big companies that have been in the space. First thing they do is yell at the distribution partners, right? By the way, that's a great sign that you were onto something. Why do you care about little old Indigo, right? I mean, come on, what are we talking? But those are validating, but nothing is easy. I mean, at the end of the day, we are writing most often $1 million, $3 million policies, right? $1 million per occurrence, 3 in the ag. And, if you get that wrong, it can be very expensive when you're subscale, right? So that's always a challenge. Thankfully, we've got fantastic investors and plenty of capital to go and deploy to build this company. But yes, I think you can't grow these things in a hockey stick fashion. The way you need to grow them is it needs to look like a stairway to heaven. Every month, you put another stair on the staircase, and it's a little higher than the last. And if you do that, you don't introduce variables that may screw up your loss ratios, and you show consistency over time. And I learned that in lending, right? Lending is very, very similar. The cash flow is the opposite direction, right? You're sending that cash away. You hope it comes back in lending. In insurance, you're collecting it. You don't want to give it up. But if you're prudent and you build your credibility by doing what you say, all this stuff happens. It just doesn't happen overnight. So we're already by far and away the fastest growing company in this space. We could grow it 4 or 5 times faster if we were writing industry loss ratios. But we've been prudent thus far to prove people that we want to be here for decades, and you should trust us with your business because we're doing it the right way. And that's happening. I'm seeing it happening, right? The first year, we got a lot less buy-in. In the second year, we're heading into our third year. I can already see we're getting better chances at larger accounts. Those accounts have heard the brand, right? They've seen the value prop. They're more comfortable. We've got more distribution partners that are pounding the table that, hey, Indigo's the right answer for you. And that's what needs to happen for us to be a top 5 physician insurance company in the next couple of years.
So, maybe Indigo's a little bit different because your investors were involved from maybe even before the actual formation of the business. And, but I'm curious, if you were giving advice to someone who is building an InsurTech business or an insurance business that will be taking on risk, how would you advise them to choose their investors? Because I think when there was a big, it's most people know when there was a big flood of capital into the industry a few years ago, there were a lot of people who didn't understand some of the things you were talking about, and there was a misalignment of the type of investor and the type of business. I think a lot of that is settled out, but nonetheless, you've been through this a couple of times now. What advice would you give to someone who's maybe doing this for the first time?
I would say, well, there's certainly cycles in everything. InsurTech went through a very painful cycle recently, right? There's only a handful of companies that I think have emerged from what I call InsurTech 2.0 and really returned to investors what investors had been anticipating. There are a lot of other companies that grew very fast, had promised, but then ended up running into issues because of the misalignment you talk about, right? You have investors that don't really understand that things could, like, you could feel great for 2 years, and year three, you get hit with all the claims. So we're trying to be, the advice I would give is you have to have balance, right? You have to have balance between growth and profitability, and you want those voices around the table, and you probably want a few folks on the board that are more growth oriented, and you absolutely want a few folks on the board who have the wounds, who have been through the pain, right? And if you look at our board, and I think our investors are pretty balanced in how they think about it, so we're very fortunate there, but we have some independents that are fantastic, right? We've got Ray Sprague, who ran small commercial car for 30 plus years. We have Howard Friedman and Bill Fleming, who each have 30 plus years in MedMal at the biggest companies, right? We have Sophia Pograb, who was a co-founder at Next Insurance, right? That saw the tech angle, the growth angle, right? With a little different approach. So I have a lot of balance there, and that helps. And it leads to very good dialogues because we're always discussing growth versus profitability trade-offs at the board level. And then you need people, the team, right? The team is critical. And I would say this advice is more generic. It's not necessarily for insurance, but the single most important factor I have seen in the businesses that I've been fortunate to be a part of, it's that we hired really, really great people. We recognized who were the top talent early on, and then we really wrapped our arms around them. And if you know who your best people are, having a constant playbook and constant dialogue to ensure you retain them is the single factor in a business's success. And if you're ever diligencing a business, looking at employee attrition is a really good sign of whether things are working or not. But it's specifically these top talent people who are so costly to replace. And I think we've done a very good job at recognizing those folks and making sure they understand that we have tremendous gratitude that they've chosen to work for us, right? There's a lot of places they can work. We ensure, of course, that they are compensated appropriately, but the best people, that's just one part of the equation, right? They need autonomy. They need to see with their own hands. They have mission critical roles that are driving this business forward. And then you got to win, because winning is euphoric and it kind of solves all problems. So we've done a really great job. We got a small team, right? We got 36 people. I don't think we really got to hire anymore because everything is so automated. So the key is for the folks that we have, we need to make sure that we retain retain them, and that will allow us to continue to learn and build a bigger and bigger business without running into some of the other issues that the last era of InsurTech.
How many people who are, coming from the MedMal side as, SMEs or, whether it's underwriting, distribution, any of the key areas of domain expertise had previous exposure to, InsurTech or a growth business, early stage business, and what'd you do to get them on board? What are you doing to keep them comfortable? I'm assuming it's a different risk profile for a lot of them in business. So how do you handle that?
The pure play medical malpractice folks that we have spent their entire careers in medical malpractice, right? Like the joke is, the hardest thing for them was learning how to use Gmail, right? Because of the email systems of some of the legacy carriers. But literally 20, 25, 30 years in the belly of the beasts. And that it's actually atypical to find people in this space, especially who have been there that long, that are willing to peek their head up and make the leap, right? So it was really difficult to get the right people, and I give them credit because what they saw was, there is a revolution going on. I personally believe AI is probably underhyped. Just from building businesses over the last 15 years, like what we can do with less people now is earth-shattering, especially in insurance, right? So they saw that there was potentially a better way. They were intellectually curious about it, and they entrusted their careers with us with the opportunity to do it. So I would say, like, for every 10 people we talk to, right, there's maybe one person that has the right risk-reward equation to make a leap from the cushiness of the industry to a startup, right, with zero physicians insurance. So, but we were able to find fantastic people, and they teach us, right, because they can tell us where not to recreate the wheel, where this has been tried 50 times, this is not the right thing, and they still have the open-mindedness to go in the direction we want to go. And I give, like, the underwriting team is a great example, because if I walked into the underwriting room of any of the incumbents, you'd have 20 people that have been there 25 years. And if I said, hey, I got a great idea, let's rip up the app and let's automate your jobs, and we only need a quarter of you, right? There's just a lot of inertia that is against you to make that type of change. Well, my underwriting team, their job is to automate their jobs, right? And it's what's in their brain and transferring that to the machines that allow you to do this at scale. But I'm telling you, it's unbelievably complex. The number of edge cases you have in this space to get the underwriting right and not to introduce risk and have a problem is really, really tough, right? So, and today we have about 25% of the business that goes straight through without a human. And then next year it'll be over 50%. And beyond that, like, it's going to scale pretty nicely, but it is really hard. And so they've been able to rewire their brains. I'm like, we have the conversation. So why did you, like, what qualitatively are you looking at? What quantitatively are you looking at that makes you comfortable with that vicarious liability risk, right? That's a really tough thing. It's different when I'm saying, like, is a doc part-time or not, right? Is a doc doing telemedicine or not? That's relatively binary, but there's a lot of stuff that's not. And you have to go through, like, a pretty robust process to build the agents that we have now that can do what they do, but they can't do what they do without the people helping us understand how to make it work.
Do you have concerns about, where regulators and legislators are going to go with their oversight of AI and how that could impact your business model?
I mean, in personal lines insurance, but specifically on the lending side, when I was dealing with consumer lending, there is a tremendous amount of risk and regulatory overhead to ensure that you don't have disparate impact, right? And you're not engaging in unfair practices. While that is, from a pure regulatory perspective, less onerous on the commercial business side, right? When you are working with businesses, the headline risk is real. So, we have a very forward-thinking data science team that is cognizant of bias, implicit bias, and non-implicit bias, and ensuring that we don't have disparate impact in how we are building the models to make underwriting decisions. But that is a constant process. Continuously, you got to check that stuff. And I do think there's inherent risk there that the best companies are going to be wary of, because even if it's not a regulatory issue, headline issue is very detrimental to your credibility, and credibility is the biggest building block we need to continue to build here in this space.
So I'm curious, AI is obviously becoming embedded on the clinical side as well. Decision-making diagnostics, documenting appointments, et cetera. And I'm curious, who do you think will own the liability when AI gets it wrong? Will it be the doctor, the health system, the software vendor, the insurer? Like, where do you see that going as AI doesn't just pervade the insurance side, but the whole industry?
Well, we're religious believers on the fact that AI is going to reduce errors and emissions, and you're seeing that like in many spaces. Like look at driving, right? Look at autonomous driving, right? It's amazing. And I have a Tesla. I do full self driving 95% of the time now. The technology is almost there, right? It's unbelievable. There's no reason why this is not going to be pervasive in protocol, in diagnostics, and there are going to be a litany of tools from making sure that you have your documentation with all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. More importantly, that you're able to diagnose quickly, more accurately, right? So I think that will be a very large positive for all insurers and specifically for medical malpractice. That being said, it's not going to be 100% foolproof. And I do think you're going to see the rise of product liability type issues in these spaces, right? Where the vendors do have some liability in the game if their tools are not working appropriately. But overall, this will be a dramatic net positive. And I think those that don't use them are actually going to see a lot of pain because they're going to get surcharged. Whereas everyone else that is investing and bought into them, they will see discounts to their policies because the insurance companies will. Hospitals, we haven't talked about. Our business has been focused on physicians to date, but half of the medical malpractice world sits within hospitals. And they are by far and away seeing the biggest pain. There's this trend of nuclear verdicts in the space where you're seeing 5, 10, 20 plus $1 million verdicts. And hospitals are always dragged into that. And I think hospitals are going to be some of the biggest beneficiaries of these AI tools. And for companies like us, right, that can help them figure out what risk sits within their employed doctor base or help them on the credentialing side figure out who not to bring on because they may pose a very large risk and end up causing one of these large claims. So they're going to be huge beneficiaries of this. And we actually are actively trying to figure out who the best vendors are out there that we can partner with. And if physicians and hospitals use them, then we can give them some discounts on the premiums.
I know we're a bit over, but I just have one quick follow-up question on that. Does that potentially impact your distribution model anyway down the road, those type of partnerships?
The hospital stuff it's not likely to be a direct insurance relationship since those hospitals are self-insured. It's much more to be a software as a service or a data as a service relationship, right? We have proprietary scores on the 1 million docs out there, and there's no reason why we can't work with a hospital to continuously score their physicians and allow them to understand why a doc has become more or less risky and what, if any, risk management they can do to reduce that risk. So that will look different there. I think on the physician side, insurance brokers are going to be the distribution partner of the future. Lots of spaces have gone direct or quasi-direct, but doctors, they spend a lot of time on more important stuff like making life or death decisions, and they really want a trusted partner when they buy what is a very expensive product for them. Because for many doctors, this is the second most expensive product in their expense in their P&L. So our job is to make the process for our intermediaries as seamless and as easy as possible to show an Indigo quote, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
All right, great. Jared, anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, I think we covered it all. I think, we're not buying a Super Bowl ad anytime soon. I think if a lot more doctors understood that there was this opportunity out there for them to take a very quick look and see if they're overpaying without losing that insurance coverage, that's critical for companies like ours in all these spaces. It's how do you get the word of mouth to work so people know that there's this option out there, because these tools are so predictive and helpful, and there's no one else there that can figure out the 20% of docs that are driving 60% of the claims. We need the physicians to be beneficiaries so that they can put some more money in their pocket to go run their businesses, right? Because doctors are getting squeezed every which way right now. So we hope we can be a small part of helping them with peace of mind, but also allowing them to provide good medicine.
All right, great. Well, Jared Kaplan, co-founder and CEO of Indigo Technologies. Thanks so much for joining me on the InsurTech Leadership Podcast.
Thanks, Jeff.